Welcome back to D&D Beyond, and today we are not just talking about D&D and D&D Beyond, we're talking about things beyond D&D. You can all see how that goes together, because I have called in one of my favorite people, and the first person on my list to ask about this. I want to know, as a lifelong D&D player who's only occasionally dabbled in the customizable card games, and in order to talk about this, there were two people I needed. I needed my coworker, Micheal Galvis, who already knows the answers to some of these questions because he loves both D&D and Magic the Gathering. And I needed my friend, Becca Scott. Please welcome to the channel, Becca Scott of Magic, of Call of Cthulhu, of all the games over time in a million places. How are you both doing today?
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited because talking about Magic and D&D and their intersection is a great joy for me.
Absolutely. That's why I'm glad that we have 24 hours slated for this stream. That's right? We're talking straight 24 hours because I have about 24 hours worth of opinions on these two games.
Oh, yes, good. Please register in chat if you would like Micheal to keep going for a full 24 hours on some kind of future stream where we will make him talk about D&D and Magic for the entire period. I'm just commissioning that right now.
Let me get in chat. Yep.
Cool. At Not the Becca Scott says, definitely do this. I am down for it. As you can tell from my loose intro, I just want to get into this conversation because it's something I've actually talked to you both in regular life about, but I've never had a chance to put you together on the stream and make this case because both Magic the Gathering and Dungeons & Dragons have long, really cool histories. Both are defined by passion, by interesting evolution over time, by art, which is somehow not the core product of either one, but indispensably tied into what makes them so cool and so compelling. But of course, they're also very different. And just to get ahead of it, it's totally fine if only one or the other of these games are for you. But on the premise that most people in the world who aren't currently playing these just don't know what might make them so great, we are going to talk about why, if you love Magic the Gathering, you might want to try Dungeons & Dragons, and why, if you love D&D, you should try MTG. So to start with, we are on a D&D channel, so let's assume first we'll go this way. Becca, can you tell us in just a couple of minutes, what's the basic gist? Maybe I've heard of Magic, but I've never dipped my toes in. What's the basic scoop? What do I need to know?
Well, let me say it directly to Becca of, what year is it? Of 4 years ago, who had never played Magic because was so daunted about this 30-year history of cards. Well, 27. And I would say, look, it is so strategic, it is so in-depth, it is so beautiful, enriching in its fantasy lore that there's no better time to get into it. Also because every time a new set comes out, which is somewhere between 4 and 6 times a year, depending on the set and the year, you can always jump in with the new set and just learn from there and just pick up the new set, like Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Look, nobody paid me to be here. I am here because you've have me as a guest, which is wonderful. But I just love these products so genuinely, and I'm so grateful that my work life coincides because I spent 2 days this weekend just in my pajamas drafting over and over on my couch while watching some Olympics in the background. But this is not the hard sell. Okay, so Magic the Gathering is a deep strategic game where you're doing resource management of spending your mana, which you can potentially increase by 1 each turn, but maybe not. It's about sequencing of the cards that you play. It's so much to do with skill, but some people use that dirty L word luck because you're shuffling your deck. So you built this deck, you created your sweet baby deck, but you never know what you're going to draw off the top. And you could be playing any of multiple formats. There's drafting, where you just open up those booster packs, take a card, pass it, and put together your deck that way. You could play standard, where you can have 4 of each card, and it's more about the technicality of having the perfect combination of cards in the deck. And then there's Commander, which is just super chill with your friends. You can have not just the regular one-on-one type of play, but you can play with, if you do more than 3 or 4, I'd say too many, but you could play with 7 people at the table, all playing Commander at once. And then it very much becomes a political game of, Amy, I'm not going to attack you just because you're smiling so much and I couldn't possibly. So, Michael, you're going down. There's so many different varieties of ways to play Magic that there's something for everyone. All right.
It's Becca, though, so watch out. I'm just saying. I'll be like, oh, yes, cool. Now I'm perfectly so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I love that. And for the record, I am very excited about Adventures in Forgotten Realms coming out. And of course, we rep a lot of D&D stuff at D&D Beyond. There's a lot of Magic stuff in the form of the setting books that are out. I do love that you alluded to the fact that, like, yes, we do like to reward our guests for their time. But this is not a sort of, like, company event thing. This was just what I thought would be fun for stream today.
I am no company woman. I hype for free. Yeah, that's all it is.
But we talk about the things that are fun to talk about, which by a lovely coincidence is the things that we get to do. Michael, what's your basic? I love D&D. I've always loved D&D. What makes Magic great?
Oh boy. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the air. Magic the Gathering is a very complex game. I believe it's been called the most dense, like most complicated game that there is that you can play. But if you're already playing D&D, you already know how to juggle the various rules that can come up in any type of game. And so picking up Magic is going to be really easy to pick up. The big selling point for me when it comes to picking up Magic the Gathering, and I actually came in the other way. I played Magic and then I found D&D. But if you're going the other direction, you can tell that I'm talking about directions because suddenly my fingers start doing this. But the big thing is, if you've been playing D&D, you already know how satisfying it is to put so much time into a character, into a certain theme, just putting hours and hours into it and then seeing it in play, seeing it come to fruition. And that's something that you get to see in Magic as well. Now, you can be a very tournament, heavy type of player where you're actively looking to see what other players are playing and then seeing how to counter them with your own deck. Or you could be like me, who is filthy casual, who just thinks, it'd be really cute, goblins. And then you just make a goblin deck with the cutest looking goblins that you can find. Or my personal favorite, it's called I think it's called a Hugging Hippos deck. And there is a very old card called Questing Feldigriff, which is a purple hippo with wings, and all of its abilities help your opponents. And so when I whip out this deck, my opponents are very confused because I'm helping them. And then they find out I have ulterior motives and I have other cards that hurt them. But that's the thing about Magic, is that you can just kind of like dream up an idea that you have, find a group just as you find any D&D group, and then do what you want with it. You can have decks where you're playing big, massive creatures where you're, throwing down a Tarrasque. Thank you, Adventures in Forgotten Realms, for that new edition. Or you could be playing, smaller, cuter creatures, just as you might as a druid in D&D using conjure animals. So, I would say that this long storied history that MTG has makes it so that there is a lot of customization that you can do with your deck so that it matches your personality and your preferred play style.
Oh, that's fantastic. So something I'm noticing as a common element here, as the D&D fan who's curious about Magic, and I have dipped my toes in over the years, but I don't know it well, which is why I enjoy hearing about it again for the first time, is that in both games, while one is sort of fundamentally cooperative and the other one actually has people who win and lose, in both cases, you have this range of, like, there's 2 phases. There's building and playing. So in D&D, you're building your character, and then you're putting them all together to see how they do against a series of challenges. And in Magic, you're building your deck and then seeing how it does against direct PvP challenge, right?
Yeah, and
So
even on that point, just with your characters in D&D, your class is going to affect what you're good at and what you're not good at. And in Magic, you have deck archetypes. So there are certain types of decks that you're going to be building. Like maybe you're an aggressive deck where you play a lot of small creatures and low-cost spells, and so you're just trying to kill your opponent as quickly as possible. But that deck, it has its own weaknesses, but then those decks have their weaknesses. So there is that bit of overlap there as well.
I would love to hear about that. Yeah, Becca, can you drill in a little bit on different deck styles as they maybe relate to classes in D&D?
Oh, heck yeah, I can. But first, just to tag on, yes, I would say that they are the cooperative and the competitive two sides of the same coin. Like, if your favorite thing about D&D is that you never have to go against the other people sitting at the table, maybe Magic isn't for you. But if you are the D&D power gamer that loves to like get into the crunchy stats and loves that element of D&D, then Magic is definitely for you. Okay, so to get into the archetypes, there are 5 colors in Magic, and they all are represented by a type of land. So we'll go with Wooburg. So we've got white, which is plains. U is blue because B was taken. And blue is islands. Then you've got black, which is swamps, and red is mountains, and green is forests. So these 5 can pair in any number of combinations of 2 or 3, and each of those combinations have their own personality. So red, you think fire, the aggressive word that Micheal was throwing around, aggressive is definitely a deck style. You're trying to get your opponent dead real quick, and a lot of red cards do this. Like smaller creatures like the goblins you mentioned, goblins are almost always, without fail, a red card. And they're throwing around fire. They're causing mischief. Then you have, so they pair well, like specifically in the Forgotten Realms. If you're just opening those packs in a limited format, which means you're just dealing with the one set, then red is pairing very well with black, which is the swamps, which is the skeletons and the zombies and the pulling things out of your graveyard, which is another word for your discard pile. You have your library and your graveyard instead of draw and discard, because it's way cooler that way. And then blue is the wizards, the mystics, the you basically can like slap someone's spell out of the air before it even hits the battlefield, which is called countering, and that's specifically in blue. So each color has its own style of play. Like a red card would never be a counter spell that prevents your opponent from even trying to do the thing they wanted to do. That's a blue thing. So they each have their own personality. White is a lot of paladins. Of course, already there were paladins, and now there's even more paladins, and clerics would definitely fit into the white archetype of sort of that divinely inspired. Lots of small creatures that become more powerful when they're in a group is sort of a recurring theme of white cards. Then you got your flying Pegasi and, whatever we're seeing here. Oh, the flump. Don't get me started on this flump. This jellyfish is a nuisance.
Anti-flump? We're taking an anti-flump stance?
Well, it would be good in the commander format where you play with more than 2 people, but flump is a card that draws both you and your opponent a card, which basically keeps you at parity. But if you're behind, you don't want your opponent drawing cards, because you typically draw 1 card at the beginning of your turn, but there's lots of cards that allow you to draw more cards. So you're able to play as many spells as your mana allows. And mana is the lands in those 5 colors. So yeah, they each have an archetype. Let's see. Amy, what is your favorite class to play?
Ooh.
And Micheal, help me out of figuring out what color archetype this would be.
Okay, I love that very much. I was going to comment earlier when you were talking about clerics. I thought it was interesting. I believe like I saw a cleric in the set actually has Cure Wounds as a card ability. I love that there's so much that's
text incorporated into the text of the card, which is often the name of a spell that is not essential to a lot of times everything on that part of the card is an important keyword, but now they're incorporating flavor text that fits with D&D into the cards more.
Okay, I love that very much. It's just delightful. And of course, you were already talking about the value of a good counterspell, which many D&D players will immediately recognize as a great element of choice making in play. So let's see. I change my mind about what's the most fun class to play basically every day. Is there something, because I don't know if this would transfer, but like, is there something equivalent to a bard play style where you are sort of, is that like having a bunch of creatures that you can sort of empower all of them on your behalf? I guess that's every Magic deck, right?
No, not
No.
at all.
Teamwork
Some have no
abilities?
creatures. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind are white decks, because in those types of decks you can have like a small army of creatures, and then you have a bunch of spells that make them stronger. But funny enough, the bard class has its own card. All of the classes in D&D have a card in Magic, and the bard class is actually red and green. And green does have their own pump spells as well. They're called pump spells. Any spell that like makes your creature or creatures
buff?
stronger. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
I want like the MTG to D&D translator. Like clearly counterspell is counterspell, but like and some minor differences in some of the rest of these.
There is a lot of borrowed language for sure. And Bard class, yeah, this is a new type of card that they created for Forgotten Realms. And their enchantments have always been a type of card, but enchantment class and the middle line of text is very important because it could say destroy all creatures. And it's only a creature if it says creature in that middle line of text. But the Bard class, is interesting that they picked red-green. I was going to say blue-green if it were up to me, because I think that blue is sort of like this manipulator. I know maybe white because you're giving a gift to other people when you give them, bardic inspiration. And that would be more in the white realm, but blue-green because green is like stompy creatures, dinosaurs, aggressive boars, or sometimes giants that are half tree. That's all green. And or like an infecting ooze is also green. And I think that paired with like the manipulator social aspect of blue, that would make a good bard for me.
I love that. So essentially Bard kind of functions as a combo Bard Ranger where you're sort of like, here's all my creatures, they're super strong. I'm going to Pokemon them at you now. I'm just mixing every metaphor to make sure I'm on top here. Cool, excellent. I'm sure no one in chat is any distortion in their brains from me just throwing out that chain of things. I just looked up the Bard class card on that list, and I love it very much. It's got a book with a lute on it. I'm very into it. But okay, so I'm trying something silly today. I asked you, Becca, to grab a D10 because I wrote down a bunch of different points of comparison, which I'm thinking of as rooms in a dungeon that you might randomly end up in as we make our way through the journey of this topic. So please, would you roll a D10 for me and let me know where you get?
A 1.
It's a 1. Excellent. I want to talk about challenge and talk about the way that you got into it a little bit with the deck types, but for Magic players who might be interested in D&D or D&D players who might be interested in Magic, what are the shared elements they might enjoy about like making these choices between the two? I would already say picking your spells every day in a way that you think will work cooperatively with everybody else's abilities does not sound that different from trying to prepare the things that you're going to need in a Magic the Gathering deck, right? So in terms of challenge, how would you compare the fun elements of Magic and D&D, Becca?
Oh, this is a great question. Okay, so
Big question, sorry.
I would say, yeah, no, it's very fun. So I would say that in preparing your deck before going into play, building the deck is so much of what you're doing, and you want to make sure that the cost has a nice curve. So you want some things that cost 1 mana, a lot of things that cost 2 and 3 mana, and only a few things that cost 4, 5, or 6 mana, because you may only play 1 land card per turn, which is your mana. So, if you're not doing anything for the first 6 turns, you're in trouble. In the same way, when you're preparing your spells, if you're a spellcaster, you want to make sure that they complement one another, that they're not all doing the same thing, and that you have, ones that can use your level 2 slot and just a couple that could use that level 3 slot, or, whatever level your character is. That's one point of comparison. I also think, that's what I got. That's what I got for now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Michael, challenge
Yeah,
in terms of like what's mechanically fun or interesting or similar about the 2 games.
I actually think I want to add to her point is that when you're preparing your spells, let's say you're a druid or a cleric, if you're trying to compare that sort of mechanic to the experience of like building a deck, then the thing that really bridges them together is that you don't always know what you're going to go up against. If you're, playing at your local game store and you have a Magic deck, you don't know necessarily, what player A, B, and C are going to be playing. And so you need to be prepared at some level for those obstacles. In the same way that a cleric might be like, well, should I prepare, or should I take detect magic, or should I be taking, enhanceability? Like, are we going to be scaling a cliff? Should I be taking this spell or this spell? And that's where a lot of the fun comes into play for me, is because I love to do that sort of crunchy sort of like, okay, well, here is a magic card that I really like, but how is it going to serve my deck? How is it going to help me and my deck do what it needs to do in order to win? And the same way that when I'm preparing spells, I'm like, okay, I really like, Long Strider, but, we're going into a city. How much am I really going to need in terms of movement speed?
Mm-hmm.
So I think having those types of like internal dialogues with yourself as you're building a deck or you're preparing a D&D character, I think there's a lot of similarities there. And for me, it's really exciting because I will spend hours and hours and hours just going through spells, knowing what the spells do. I don't know why I read spell descriptions for like certain spells. Like everybody knows what Cure Wounds does. Everyone knows what Healing Word does. But I will always reread it because who knows? I may miss something.
Or get an idea about. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. One more thing. Oh gosh, it's gone. When you're building your deck, that it's similar to what you were saying of like, what will be the purpose? What might I come up against? And is everything I'm building going to synergize together? And some people may play D&D in a more casual way, which I'm should preface this by saying I'm pretty new at D&D, and so I'll do things like go into a rage and then cast a spell. This is not a thing you want. If you are a barbarian that has multi-classed into druid, you don't need your 2 attacks as your barbarian, because if you wild shape, then you're only going to get that animal's benefits. So it's like knowing exactly the thing to do to function best and not having extraneous stuff, if you're that sort of power gamer D&D player, is really analogous in Magic to, for example, in paper cards all over my dining room table right now, I'm building a deck that is all about enchantment auras. So basically it's something you stick on top of a creature to make them more powerful, just a buff. And they call this a Voltron style deck, where you're just trying to make one creature as powerful as possible and then protect that creature. So I'm looking at the cards, and I had a really cool card that would have made a bunch of 1/1 sapling tokens, but I took it out because it's not synergistic to my purpose of keeping this one giant creature big and safe. So anything not in there gets pulled out. And those 2 things seem parallel to me.
I think that there's a lot of potential enjoyment there, because of course we talk a lot about how you don't have to play D&D to optimize, but it can be fun to sort of be like, I picked out my subclass features and I combined them with the multi-class I chose, and now I have figured out a way for this to work, and it's fun to see that come into being. And it's not just about getting obsessed with the numbers, although that can be fun in its own right. It's about enjoying the way the rules work together to create those play experiences, right? And I feel
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
while obviously Magic lends itself to being hyper competitive, Micheal, you alluded to like sometimes you just want to make a weird, goofy deck because it sounds fun. It sounds like that's at least a thing you can do in Magic.
Yes,
You can
definitely.
make a squirrel tribal deck.
Becca,
Yes, that
why
is-
didn't you lead with that? You know
Yeah,
me.
that's actually my husband's favorite deck. Is he has a squirrel deck, and it's just all the cards through the years of Magic that can make squirrels or pump up squirrels, to make your squirrel stronger, and then he just like overruns you with them, and it's so adorable. And I think which Modern Horizons 2, the set that came before Adventures in Forgotten Realms, that introduced a bunch of new squirrels, and he just.
I was going to suggest that, but you already know about those new squirrels.
That's amazing. And just my obligatory once a day comic book reference, Squirrel Girl canonically used this to defeat Doctor Doom in her first appearance. So I'm just going to say it is multiversally canon and in all places that the Squirrel deck sounds like a very good idea.
Amy is Squirrel Girl.
But just inspiring. I do want to keep rolling dice, but we're about at the halfway point, so I do want to stop and make sure that we're taking into account briefly if you have we talked about why D&D players might want to get into Magic, but why might Magic players want to play around with D&D? If you had to give the short elevator pitch version of this, Micheal, what makes D&D so fun if you're coming from a Magic background?
You love Magic because there's endless possibilities of what you can do, and you can do the same thing in D&D. Where in Magic you do have to worry about like resource management, and you will see that in D&D. In D&D, it's a little bit more predictable. You know what spells you have at the ready. You know how many spells you can cast, and over time, as you delve deeper into D&D, you're going to learn more about common sorts of obstacles that you will need to overcome, and that will help inform the characters that you make. I think for me, that's a really fun part about the game is looking at a character and being like, okay, I'm going to make a sorcerer who can heal and buff my allies, and that means I'm not going to be dealing a lot of damage. And then coming to terms with that, because sometimes I do want to be good at absolutely everything, but being able to say like having the choice of like how you want to approach the game, you can be like, I don't want to really be in combat, and if you're communicating that with people that you're playing along with, you can make that work. Or you could be like, I just want to grind through combat over and over, and if that's okay with your fellow players and your dungeon master, then that's the type of game you can have. So like in the same way that with Magic you can really customize your experience based off of like the kind of deck that you play, you can have that in D&D as well, based off of the class you're playing, maybe the race that you pick up, the lineage, and also the players that you're playing with, because it is a cooperative game. You're there to be silly and have fun and gawk at like the fireball that did a ton of damage to the boss monster and took them out.
And I would say, like, those big moments where you're like, I can't believe all those things came together and worked and it accomplished that. I feel like that seems like it would be very much a shared element where you're going to always remember that, like, due to the roll of the dice or the way the cards came down, this unlikely but extremely cool combination allowed something to happen. And I feel like that's got to be shared between the games. But Becca, you might be newer to D&D, but I know you've played a lot of TTRPGs and other board games. You have a broad base from which to comment on this. Why might Magic folks enjoy dipping into Dungeons and Dragons?
Okay, well, one, it's good for you because it teaches you to work well with others. But I think it really depends on the type of play that your dungeon master is providing, or maybe you need to step into that dungeon master role to really get the most. If you are the type of Magic player that wants to play crunchy D&D, because some people don't even play with minis, and some people like to focus more on story. As we were saying, you could ask your DM. Micheal was saying that you could just ask your DM to never do combat. We don't like combat that much. But I think that combat and the nitty-gritty of you are fighting a dragon and the dragon has so many hit points and you have to work together using what you already created of the character that has the maximum synergy between all of their subclass choices and proficiencies, and then rolling the d20 is like top decking the perfect card, and you get that adrenaline rush of this is exactly what I needed, or I did my action surge and it hit. And really, I didn't understand that until very recently, watching some very technical play with some very high level players and watching how it was like, all right, now I action surge and I'm going to take the hunter's mark. So it's going to be -5, but it's worth it and I can do it. And like watching that, I thought, oh my gosh, there is a lot of room for me to grow as a technical D&D player, which really, really appeals to me because I have two loves, acting and competitive gaming. And so like D&D, you can put those two things together. You're doing improv and you're also very technically scoring points against non-player enemy. So I think that there are a lot of parallels, and I think that D&D is for everyone, especially Magic players. Just make sure that your DM is counting hit points.
I love that, and it feels as if, and again, these were just my guesses, and y'all can be like, no, not at all a thing, but it feels as if, like, if you're sitting down to one of the matches you were talking about, where there's 4 different people playing 4 completely different types of decks, I feel like D&D is like, what if a giant came over the hill and all 4 of you needed to team up your different strengths and weaknesses and all go in together on one battle? Like, it feels like that's what you get in a tabletop role-playing game. And you get the idea that will persist across time, where it's almost like a legacy mechanic in a board game, where you're like, here's how the game plays today, and then at level 5, and at level 10, and at level 15, we are all these hyper-evolved versions of those builds, having sort of grown together over time and made more choices along the way. But like, an interesting, I don't know, how long does a normal Magic the Gathering game last?
It could
Well,
be
if you're
very
talking
fast.
it kind of depends if you're playing Commander, which is that multiple player format, more than 2 players typically, in which case it can be 30 minutes to 3 hours, depending on how much you're doing a card that wipes the whole board, board wipe. But
like revisiting those over, like with the same sets of things over the course of years, I feel like would be an interesting, maybe could be appealing, could be not. Maybe your favorite thing about it is that it's 30 minutes and you're done. But I think that it seems like it might be a fun angle. Magic experts weigh in.
Well, I would say the average game on Arena is 10 minutes. And that's on purpose because if a game, like, there's so many tabletop games that I have sitting on my shelf, and getting someone that comes over at 9 p.m. to play a tabletop game is kind of tough. Getting someone that knows how to play Magic to just play one standard match is pretty easy if it's going to be 10 to 15 minutes. And that is a design thing that they were trying to do because, fun fact, Richard Garfield created Magic as a game to play before everyone showed up for your D&D session.
That as a piece of lore, but I wasn't sure what the exact details were. That's friggin' awesome.
I mean, I've heard it as lore as well. I didn't hear it straight from Richard Garfield, but I'm going to count it as fact.
Let's get that D10 back out because I want to get through a couple of my other comparison points.
Oh, I have to roll it. I was waiting till you told me what I was rolling for, and hold on, I already rolled another one. Okay, it's a 3.
It's a 3. All right. Well, that I just wrote art for this one. But we kind of covered it earlier. I think some of the best artists to work in the entire world of fantasy have come through the doors of Magic the Gathering or D&D over the last couple of years. I particularly love the Adventures of Forgotten Realms set, which has this range of what look like old school module things, old, very early D&D illustration styles, all the way up to the most lavishly rendered, modern-looking paintings. I don't know what I mean by modern looking. I meant as compared to illustrated styles in D&D, not like painting was invented yesterday. Have y'all heard about this thing, painting? I think it's going to be big. But
I don't know. I'll hedge my bets and wait and see.
Any quick comments for just like, can you pick a impossible question? Is there a favorite in terms of art between Magic and D&D, or a sub area that you love?
We just passed one of my favorites of this set, which is Werewolf Pack Leader.
Ooh.
Nice. I actually have one of my favorite cards. One of my favorite cards, but also one of my favorite cards for artwork. I don't know how well it'll show up on camera. Let me see if I can come on, buddy.
Force that.
There you go. Grandmaster of Flowers. This is Bahamut's card. And I'm not sure how well you could see that, but in the art, so this is Bahamut in his human form, his humanoid form. And in the artwork, you can see all of the, I believe they're canaries that fly around him. What I love about this is that if you're new to D&D lore, you would see this artwork and just, I mean, it's gorgeous. But once you actually start looking into the character behind the card, you'll learn that Bahamut is essentially the god of all good dragons. And all of those adorable little canaries flying around him are ancient gold dragons, which protect him when he is in his humanoid form. So,
and now we are actually back to Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, which is available for pre-order right now. And that just, happened to be on my mind, what with the canaries. Continue.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I really love about these two games too, is that there's just so much lore. You can look at any card's artwork, whether it's this current set or in previous sets, and then if you're reading any of the published materials for the sets, because Wizards does publish a lot of short stories for their sets, then you can learn oh, this particular card is depicting this. What's fun about this current set is that if you're a D&D player and you're looking at this Magic set, you're like, oh, I know that character because of A, B, and C. So I'm going to pull out another card that's my favorite. Volo, Guide to Monsters.
Yes.
Who is terribly out of focus. Let me see if I can get him in focus. Not really.
Yes.
But if you've played Waterdeep Dragon Heist, he shows up in the very first chapter. He is quite the character because he is the author of Volo's Guide to Monsters, which is a D&D book which has all sorts of really awesome monsters in it. And the card itself plays on the D&D lore because it rewards you for playing different creatures, different types of creatures. So if you're building a deck around this iconic D&D character, then you're kind of getting to experience what it would be like to be Volo, because you're just I don't want to see two merfolk. I want to see a merfolk. I want to see a beast. I want to see this, that, and that. And then that's kind of how your commander deck, because he's a really great commander card, how your commander deck would come together is you play Volo, and then all of the other creatures in your deck are completely different from each other, and you're being rewarded for that.
You're really selling. I didn't know playing in character in building my deck was an option. So one D&D player, I'm leaning in curiously at this description. Thank you.
Oh yeah, we were doing a disservice to Commander by not mentioning the fact that in addition to only having one of each card in your 99 card deck, you have a commander that is in charge of this whole legion, and they are always castable from the command zone, which means you're going to base everything around this one card you always have access to, like Volo, who you can definitely do the voice of as you play.
Amazing.
Especially if you're Amy Vorpal.
Oh, okay, I got to see that. That's
a strong recommendation for anyone who is like, well, I don't know how to play Magic, but I would be interested in watching some people play a very compelling game. There is a show by the Command Zone. I think you know Jimmy Wong and Josh Lee Kwai. They host this show called Game Nights, and Nights with a K. And this show is incredible. I saw someone post, I think it was Carlos Luna, that was like, I just started watching the Post Malone episode, and I haven't played Magic in 15 years, but I watched the whole episode, and it was incredible because they do these animations with each card, and they explain and read each card in this beautiful way that really illustrates exactly what's going on. And I'm a very, very big fan of the show. So just want to shout that out. Our friend Amy Vorpal also recently played Tiamat as her commander, and definitely did a voice the whole time.
I love everything about that. Of course, Amy Vorpal, also a D&D writer, and doing Fizban's dialogue in the upcoming Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Is something on my mind today? I mean, you can pre-order it now. I'm not saying you should have to, but what you can also get is, and I don't want to run out of time for this, if you are a Magic player who loves some of that lore and loves some of these things, there's a bunch of great stuff waiting in D&D for you, because there are 2 going on 3 setting books in D&D that are drawn from the worlds of Magic the Gathering. So there's Ravnica, Theros, and the upcoming Strixhaven, A Curriculum of Chaos. What y'all, with the broader, like, to me, I'm like, okay, that automatically sounds fun, but how would you explain to a Magic player why they might want to duck into those games?
Yeah, so Ravnica is, I think, one of the most popular sets that have come out in Magic history. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But the big appeal for playing that set and drafting it was that you got to pick the guild that you were in. And the different guilds in Ravnica kind of determine the type of deck playstyle that you're going to experience. And so translating that into D&D, you get to be with Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, you get to join the different guilds. So if you're like, I absolutely love Selesnya, I'm very nature loving, I want to commune with nature, then, you have a guild for you, and you are rewarded for being part of that guild. So, and that's what I like about, Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica and Mythic Odysseys of Theros and the upcoming Strixhaven, A Curriculum of Chaos, is that if you're a Magic player, it could be a lot easier getting into D&D when you're familiar with the world around you. If you're playing your first session and all of a sudden some goblin in goggles runs up to you and he's cackling with electricity, as a Magic player, you would be like, that is an guild member. And so it makes it a little easier for you to jump into the lore, jump into the environment, and really understand, like, okay, what's at stake here? Are we going to be running through the maze that is in Ravnica, or if I hear about some very sad mage that's in all blue robes, then you're gonna be like, oh, Jace is here. I know, I have the same reaction.
If Jace is your favorite planeswalker, we need to talk. That's so funny because I forgot that. So I've only been playing Magic since like 2019. So I did not realize that the guilds of Ravnica, I mean, I did, but it didn't compute that it was that common knowledge to know these guild names for D&D players, because those names of every color pair from Guilds of Ravnica is still what they're referred to as. Until Strixhaven, that was the first time that there's new names for some of the same color pairs, but probably won't stick in the same way, except Izzet is now Prismari, which is a college you can attend, the College of Arts and Theater and theatrical type, creative endeavors in Strixhaven. But it is very much a choose your college within the magical university kind of fun, if that's your bag.
Absolutely. So we've been talking a lot about Strixhaven because we're very excited for the Strixhaven supplement to come out, which contains its own level 1 through 10 adventure that you can go through and declare your college and play out. And they've got a social mechanic, and there are dances and after-school jobs and monster attacks and just everything that you want, which I'm very excited for. But I love learning more about like why it's like that and where that comes from. And I think it was a long time before I even knew just how deep the lore went with Magic the Gathering, that there were published stories along with it. That Adventures of Forgotten Realms actually has free adventures you can play if you are a Magic Gathering player curious about D&D. You can download those from Wizards right now. And let's see, I'm going to speed round through. We talked challenge, we talked story, we talked art, we talked a little bit of PvP, we talked a bit about building. You build a deck, you build a character, you build a party. It's all about your choices.
Can I tell you my favorite card that I wanted to show art-wise?
Yes.
Because I recently bought a frame. Okay, so this is not going to be on the main list of the card art, but it's Mother of Runes from Secret Lair. So Secret Lair is like a special drop box you can get, and Magic was really, really sweet to send me a box of awesome Secret Lair stuff, all the summer drops. And the Mother of Runes Secret Lairs are so incredible. Just type that into Google and it'll come up. And I framed 3 of them side by side. They have this beautiful, like, swirling female, powerful, harnessing nature kind of look to them that just blew my mind. And I immediately bought a baseball card frame for 3 of them to go together. And it's now hanging on my wall.
I'm looking them up right now because they sound really gorgeous. Oh, wow.
I know. I'm sorry they're not on that big list that you already have ready to show. But there is a Mother of Runes, but she's like an older lady drinking a cup of coffee. And it's not that one. There's alternate card art for a lot of them.
I mean, that sounds rad as well. But
also rad.
That's fantastic. And I do love the fact that there's always an art credit on the bottom of a Magic card, even when during times where I haven't been playing. I'll just buy cards at random sometimes because they're very pretty. And I love paying that forward to the appreciation for the folks who give us all of these beautiful products of art and design. And let's see, we talked very briefly about the settings. So we have Magic the Gathering settings that have made their way into D&D, and now D&D settings making their way into Magic. So especially if you're looking for that familiarity, you can cross in. There's actually a dungeon crawling mechanic that's been added. There's dice rolling that comes into play, and you'll meet owlbears and flumps. And it's, I feel like, about as nice an on-ramp as you could possibly have to sort of trying that out. And there are, let's see, class types, collectability, and change over time in terms of, I feel like, do you have any comments on the differences? Obviously, Magic is premised around getting either physical cards or playing digitally, which is like D&D can be done with imagination or minis or getting more books. They both feed the I want more of the beautiful objects impulse. But any comments on sort of what being a player of either of them is like, and what might make them appealing crossovers, if that made sense, Becca?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I just cracked a few packs sitting at my, this is like the ones I'm not keeping. I mean, I am keeping them, but and I don't have autofocus on, but I have so many cards that this is just what I opened this week. So I recommend Arena to people because if you're not already bit with the addiction of collecting Magic cards, Arena sorts everything for you. You can download the game for free, and then you can always pay for virtual packs or earn virtual packs by playing with the starter decks they give you. And it's really nice to not have to. They automatically count how many of each type of card are in your deck. So you can know how many green lands and how many white lands to put in your deck based on the counts of everything versus having to count and then recount in paper, which I spend hours every week doing because I have an addiction and I'll also be trying to procrastinate. But, but also if you, I mean, I am sickly addicted to the physical card collection. It just becomes a thing of organization. So if you are that very type A kind of person that loves to organize them, then get into paper. And if you are also interested in the commander format, which we've talked a lot about, you kind of need to be in paper. But otherwise, if you just want to dip your toe, download Arena.
I think I like that you mentioned Magic Arena too, because it is free. In the same way we do have on D&D Beyond, we have the basic rules, which are free. So, if you're if you want to try either game, you don't have to pay any money, which I really appreciate because, there's a lot of different Magic sets out there. There's a lot of D&D books out there. And if you're like, I don't know if this is really going to be my thing, I think it's really great that Wizards has kind of made them accessible. And that way, if you do get bit by that collectible, that bug that makes you want to just collect all of the like alternate art cards and all of the alternate cover D&D books, then that's something that you can do.
And I just last week you were showing off a beautiful sapphire dragon. So there's all kinds of beautiful things to have and to hold in both games. But I do love that you can try out either of them and just see whether they might be your jam. All right. Is there anything that we didn't get to cover that you want to make sure people know if they might, a Magic the Gathering player who might be curious about D&D or a D&D player who might be curious about Magic? Micheal.
I mean, I want to go back to the lore. The lore is just so rich in both of these games. Whether or not that you're playing them, if you're a Magic player who hasn't played D&D, look up the lore, for example, for Xanathar. He has a really great card in Magic, and you'll find that he's a really delightful character in D&D. And so just reading up on him, I think could make any deck that you build with him just a lot more fun to know, like, oh, so that's why there's a goldfish in the artwork. And, same thing for the other card. I'm blanking on the character's name, but he has a hamster, Boo, who is
Minsted Boo!
Yes.
Go for the eyes!
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, I was actually, I was not familiar with that character. I didn't play the Baldur's Gate games. Oh my gosh, you have the card. I didn't play the early Baldur's Gate games. So I was like, who is this character? And I started reading up on it. I was like, I love this character. And then I discovered that these characters actually make a cameo, or a statue of them makes a cameo of them if you're playing Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus. It's a very small mention, but it's something that, if you're looking around the city, it's something that you will discover. And, those are the little bits and pieces that I love to see in both games. Is like, if you really look closely at the art, you're going to find a lot, and you're going to really see the depth that is in both of these games, and I think you'll really appreciate it. I think you'll really love to see all of the hard work, all of the history that goes into both of these games.
Aww, Becca, final thoughts?
Well, all that was wonderful and beautiful, and I need to check in on some lore, but I do really love with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, I am learning a lot about D&D lore from the card names in this set, which I now have memorized because I've drafted it so much. So as someone who understands D&D, plays D&D, but doesn't necessarily know all of the history and the lore of D&D, I'm learning who Thritzdorden is, and Icing Death, and all these different important pieces and touchstones of D&D lore and history that is really, really easy and digestible, that I'm just like, I absorb it like a sponge, and it's so nice that these things have crossed over. That's a thing I really love about it. Final thoughts that we didn't talk about. Greatest game of all time. It's so satisfying to play Magic. I just love it so much, and I hope you will too. And can I do one quick shout out? I will be live streaming a role-playing game, not the one we talked about, in 2 hours from now if you're watching this live on my own channel.
Because while Becca is a force to be reckoned with in a competitive game, she is also one of the greatest storytellers I have ever had the pleasure to roll dice with. You bring everything to the table, cards, dice, everything else. Where can people find you?
I am twitch.tv/TheBeccaScott, and I will be trying to kill my players tonight.
It's semi-co-op. It depends on the game, really, And Micheal, where can the people find you?
You can find me on D&D Beyond, and also on Twitter at Micheal Galvis.
Excellent. And shout out to, we didn't have time for questions today, but I want to thank Halfwing to which charity do we have to donate for a 24-hour Micheal Talks About Magic stream? We'll discuss that one off of it, because you're committed now. We will see you next time on D&D Beyond. D&D!